Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled with chronic pain, chronic illness, or know someone who does, or simply want to eliminate suffering in your life, then do we have the liberating show for you. Today I'll be talking with Toni Bernhard, the award-winning author of How to Be Sick, a Buddhist-Inspired Guide for the Chronically Ill and Their Caregivers, and How to Wake Up, a Buddhist-Inspired Guide to Navigating Joy and Sorrow. Her latest book is called How to Live Well with Chronic Pain and Illness, a mindful guide. But I'd argue these books aren't just for people with pain or illness. They're handbooks or guides to living life free of suffering, and I think we can all learn a lot from them. Today we'll be talking about how to live well with chronic illness and pain, what this means, what this looks like, how to alleviate our own suffering, feel better, at least in our minds, and even use the experience for inner growth and lots of self-love and compassion. That plus we'll talk about a not-to-do list, the tyranny of positive thinking, what to do when the blues come calling, why Tylenol is not the answer, and why you can't have a horse when you're living in the middle of Los Angeles. So welcome to the show, Toni. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready to shine.
Woohoo! And you are shining bright. So before we dive right into things, I've got to ask, can you tell us about the big white boat?
The big white boat was a car that we owned for many years, and it was a white Ford LTD. Mm-hmm. And my children and their friends nicknamed it the Big White Boat because it was quite, it was hard to park, it was hard to drive, it was nothing like the small little Honda Civic type cars that you see today. So I do write about it in the book. I write about how I learned how to enjoy myself on the freeway by putting that big white boat in the slow lane and driving slowly instead of always being on someone's bumper and wanting to pass them. And so it's life in the it's my story of life in the slow lane.
I like it. And it reminds me, my first car that I had was from my grandmother. And it was a full-size, Oldsmobile Delta 88 that my grandmother had named Green Gertrude.
That's a great name.
And so I inherited another go in the slow lane of Green Gertrude.
Yes.
So going from there, if you don't mind me asking, if we go back in a time capsule, can you tell us what your life was like before 2001?
Well, it really was a dividing point because that's the year I became chronically ill. Before 2001, life was good and life was pretty easy. Mm-hmm. I have two children. My husband and I have two children. They were grown. They'd moved out of the house already. They were married and good marriages. And I had just completed a 6-year stint as a dean of students at the UC Davis Law School. Mm-hmm. That's how I got gray. And I returned to teaching, which was my first love. Mm-hmm. And so my life was quieter with my children gone. I live in a beautiful small town, Davis. Yeah. And I love teaching, and I was active in the community. I was a what we call a CASA, court-appointed
student
advocate.
Special.
And yes, and I had a boy who was 10 years old, who was in the social services system. He had child protective services, and he lived in a boys' home. And once a week, I would go and take him out, and I became a mentor for him. And I was just active in a lot of ways, and I had to give all of that up when I got sick.
So then what happened in 2001? And thank you for sharing. What happened when you went to, I think it was Paris?
Yes. My husband and I, we really aren't world travelers. We like to go to Hawaii, which isn't that far from California. But we planned this 3-week trip to Paris. We had this idea of just immersing ourselves in the life of the city. So I found this little studio apartment for us to stay in. And we went in May of 2001, so 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And the second day there, I felt sick, and I just assumed it was jet lag, quite frankly, for the first couple days. And then it became clear that I had some kind of acute and rather severe viral infection. And I had to stay in bed. And so for the first week, my husband would get up and I would push him out the door and say, "You enjoy Paris." And said, "Well, it's no big deal. Instead of 3 weeks, we'll have 2 weeks. And then instead of 2 weeks, we'll have 1 week." Basically, I spent those 3 weeks in bed. And when we returned to California, I briefly thought I'd recovered, and I had a relapse. And from that relapse, I never recovered. I fell into a state of, I call it the flu without the fever. I don't have the acute symptoms of flu, like fever and sore throat, but I feel as if I have the flu, that dazed, sick feeling where you can't stand up for very long. And I'll be using adrenaline to get through this interview, which is fine with me, even though one does crash when using adrenaline. I just feel as if I have the flu. And I I've probably been to even in the first few months, I probably saw a dozen specialists. Now I've seen dozens. And the consensus is I have some form of what they call chronic fatigue syndrome, which is really an illness that's not very well understood. The doctors think that my immune system was compromised in some way by this virus and never reset properly. And so it's as if it reads me as sick and responds accordingly. When you're sick, your immune system gets on full alert and it produces cytokines to fight off the illness. And a lot of the sick feeling that people feel is not due to the virus or bacteria itself, but to the side effects of the immune system doing what it should be doing. Well, we need to find a way, but medical science doesn't know a way to reset my immune system, in effect, to calm it down. Yeah.
And so, if it's okay with me asking, what is life like on a daily basis then?
Well, life is pretty relentlessly the same. As I said, chronic fatigue syndrome is not very well understood. I actually think it's probably half a dozen different illnesses that have yet to be isolated because so little research money is put into it because of this terrible label of fatigue. I mean, everyone's fatigued.
It's a label of get over it. I apologize, but...
Right, it does. And so there are some people with a chronic fatigue syndrome diagnosis who have good days, and they're able to go out and about. They can even travel sometimes. There may be some payback later. Whatever it is that's going on with me is relentlessly the same. And so I'm pretty much housebound. I get up in the morning and I never feel well. I may feel too sick to get out of bed. I may feel well enough to move around the house. And then come about noon, 1 o'clock, my body simply collapses the way when one has the flu, you just can't stay up for that long. And so I take an afternoon nap. Sometimes that refreshes me a bit. By about 4 or 5 o'clock, I just gradually, my condition deteriorates until I'm just stuck on the bed in the evening. And my husband and I sometimes call this stun gun state. Sometimes I can't even watch television. I feel so sick. So that's why I say it's similar to the flu, where you simply I can't sustain activity for very long.
It's fascinating. This describes a little bit of what my wife Jessica was like for about 2 years, where she'd get up, she'd be almost clear-minded first thing in the morning, and by about noon she'd be shutting down. She would also have headache syndromes, and then she'd sleep for a few hours in the afternoon and then be semi-fuzzy, semi-clear till 5, 6, and then she was done for the day.
That, you've just described my day. And I hear she's doing better. I'm just thrilled to hear that.
Oh. I'm like I'm fighting back tears myself.
I can imagine, because my illness has been as hard on my husband as it's been on me. And, I mean, he's lost his partner out in the world. It's very, very hard on him. He would probably disagree if I said that it's as hard as on him as it is on me, because he's a wonderful caregiver. But I know it is.
It's it's hard on the heart. It is to watch a loved one go through this. It's a very different role than you expected.
Yes, it's one of those unexpected turns that life takes, which is why, when you introduced me, you said that the themes in my books can apply. They're almost, this illness is a metaphor for life itself.
It is.
Because life is always taking unexpected turns, and it may not have to do with your health. It may have to do with your job or a relationship or... Yeah.
So let's go from there, because I think, to me, a beautiful moment, a pivotal moment there. We'll go with pivotal moment in 2013, when you said, although I can't force myself to get better, I could heal my mind.
Yes, I spent the first few years of being sick. And actually, this would have been earlier than 2013, because there's no reason for you to know these dates. But my first book was published in 2010. So this would have been more like 2007, 2008. I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my illness in a state of resentment, despair at times, and anger directed at myself, which I've learned from so many people who've written to me is very, very common. We live in a culture.
Is it like anger at I've betrayed myself, my body is betraying me, or?
No, my kind of anger was you're weak, you're mentally weak because you can't will your body to get better. There's blaming the body for getting sick. There's blaming the mind for not having the strength of character to get well. And I've learned that many people in my situation, the same thing happens. They blame themselves for something that is not their fault. We're in bodies, and bodies get sick and they get injured and they age. That's a fact of life. That's one of what I like to call life's stark realities. because I believe strongly that the path to peace begins with taking a realistic view of what life is about, what you do control and what you don't control. Otherwise, you spend all your time really hitting your head against the wall, metaphorically, trying to control what you don't control. Mm-hmm. And so you said I reached this point where I realized I may not be able to heal my body, but I can heal my mind. And I would say two things about that. First, it doesn't mean I've given up on healing my body. I just started yet another new treatment a couple days ago. I'm always looking to improve my health, and I'm always thinking I could wake up tomorrow and be well. Mm-hmm. So it's not that, but it's kind of a balancing act. At the same time that it's important to be proactive about your health, it's also important to accept where you happen to be at the moment. And that's where the mental healing comes in. Because if you wake up every morning and your mind is filled with anger and resentment mm-hmm. and self-blame, there's no hope of finding any measure of peace in life with your circumstances.
I think maybe the overarching big picture theme here, which you realized at that point, correct me if I'm wrong, is really about love for yourself and compassion.
Absolutely. I like to say that self-compassion is my go-to practice when I'm stuck, and mm-hmm. and because I still have my bad days mm-hmm. mentally where I feel frustrated and disheartened. And when that happens, I've trained myself, this is really mental training, mm-hmm. to treat myself with compassion. Sometimes I even speak to myself in a compassionate voice, sometimes with softly out loud, but most of the time silently, and say things like, it's really difficult having been sick for 15 years and to have your life turned upside down and not be able to do so many of the things that you thought you'd be able to do. That's really hard. And when you acknowledge that to yourself, you might even start crying. That's fine. Those are tears of self-compassion. It's as if you're it's as if you're petting yourself and saying, it's okay. Mm-hmm. You didn't do anything wrong. Life is unpredictable, uncertain. People they get in auto accidents. They pick up viruses they didn't expect to. It's not your fault. What you need to do is take your life as it is, as your starting point, and then see what you can do to make the best life for yourself and those around you.
Where did this insight come from? How did you make this shift in the middle of the muck?
I can't be positive, but I would attribute it to my Buddhist training. Mm-hmm. At the point that I got sick in 2001, I'd been a practicing Buddhist for 10 years already. I don't practice Buddhism as a religion, mm-hmm. More as, and this is what I think the Buddhist teachings were, a practical path that helps us learn how to live. Mm-hmm. And so when I first got sick, I had a very regular meditation practice. I used to go on at least 2 10-day retreats a year, And so, and I still have bookshelves full of Buddhist books. I learn by reading what others have said.
Mm-hmm.
And also sometimes the Buddha's own words, they were written down. His teachings were oral, as were Jesus's, and then somebody wrote the people wrote them down later. But when I first got sick, I wasn't able to access that. I was so caught up in fear about my career and self-blame and anger. But I like to think that the Buddha's teachings were waiting in the wings. And I think I finally just reached a point where I said, what I'm doing isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just adding mental suffering to the physical suffering of the illness. And that's perhaps when the light bulb went on, because the Buddha's teachings are all about mental suffering, about alleviating mental suffering for yourself and for others. He himself experienced a lot of physical suffering. So all of his teachings really point to alleviating mental suffering. And so what I did, that turning point, was when I let those teachings back into my life.
Yep.
And applied them to the circumstances I was in, which was being sick.
What then is, you talk about early on in your book along these lines, mindfulness attention or caring attention.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Well, mindfulness has become part of the general culture now.
Mm-hmm.
It was a practice that originates, well, I'm not sure, but I guess I'm not totally positive about that, but I believe it originated with the Buddha. But now has entered mainstream culture. And it's really very simple. It means, well, it's simple but hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
It means paying attention to your present moment experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in my book, everybody has teachers have lots of different definitions of mindfulness. I simply add the word caring attention. And the reason I add that is that sometimes people think mindfulness means there's an aloofness to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I point out, I came
like
up with
a disattachment, detachment.
Detachment, right. Disengagement from life.
Mm-hmm.
And I use in my book an example that makes it so clear why it has to be caring. If you're sitting on a park bench practicing being aware of your present moment experience, and you see a child about to run out into the street and no adult around, it doesn't mean that you sit there and say, child about to run into the street.
I don't even want to laugh at that one. It's just wrong.
No, it's ridiculous. You get up and you save that child. So that's why, and perhaps that's the compassion side. You can't really separate these
Mm-hmm.
things, compassion from mindfulness. So that's why I add the word caring. But the practice itself, paying caring attention to your present moment experience, is so essential to helping people with whatever troubles they're facing in life. Because what we tend to do is take our current difficulties, and of course I focus on illness, but it would apply to any difficulty, and we start to tell stories. We start to, I call it future forecasting. So if you're having a day and you're feeling in pain, you start to say, oh, I'm always going to be in pain. My life is ruined. my friends are going to stop calling because they don't want to have a friend who they can't depend on because she might be in too much pain. And you start telling yourself all these stories about the future, or you start ruminating about the past. Oh, life was, when I was teaching, I was happy. I'll never be that happy again. And all that does is add mental suffering to your physical suffering. But if you can but what mindfulness does is bring you out of your stories. Mm-hmm. Because what is in the present moment? You're breathing. And it's a good way to do that it takes practice. Mm-hmm. Because we tend to get lost in stories and not even realize we're lost in them. So that's why it takes practice to be able to say, oh, I'm worrying about something that I have no control over. That's just making me feel worse. And what I recommend is just when you see that that's happening, stop. Take a few, maybe 2 or 3 conscious breaths and bring yourself into the moment. And the relief is just tremendous. And even if you're in pain, because you could say, well, here's what's going on in the present moment. I hurt. Mm-hmm. And that can be true, but at least you're present for it and can begin to cultivate compassion for that pain. Instead of being lost in stories about the future that you can't predict or the past that is history. So mindfulness is just a wonderful soothing balm for the heart. That's balm, B-A-L-M, the heart and the mind.
You talk about later in the book about different types of suffering or 3 components of physical suffering. And I'm thinking back of Jessica, as my wife, as she's been coming out of this. And because it was mold toxicity, on days that there'd be humidity in the air, there'd be more spores and stuff just naturally occurring in the air, sure. And she'd go down, whoop. Yeah. And what we found is that there was a physical component to it, certainly, but there was also an emotional reaction to it. And while we couldn't necessarily do anything about the physical, if we could work on the emotional, that stripped away. It's like wearing 2 coats of pain. One's a raincoat, a slicker, and then another underneath. You can at least get one of the coats off.
You're absolutely right. Actually, the Buddha called that the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain, and then the second arrow
is that the one we put in ourselves.
Right. And when you say that, I say there are 3 elements. Mm-hmm. 2 of those elements are the mental side of it, and they could be just called one, but I like to separate them. So when you're experiencing pain or sickness, yes, there is the physical pain, the physical sickness, and there actually are some things you can do about that. There are some exercises. There's a chapter in the book on helping with bodily pain, like doing body scans mm-hmm. and things like that.
One of the cool ones that we would use in these conditions was actually surprisingly tapping. Was very helpful.
Of that. Yeah. So there's the physical pain itself, mm-hmm. but then there are 2 more components, and it surprises people to learn they are mental, even though the pain or discomfort is physical. The first one is your emotional reaction. Mm-hmm. I hate this pain. The resentment, the self-blame, just that initial emotional, the aversion to what's happening, which doesn't make it go away. As a matter of fact, it can make it worse, because that aversion can lead you to tighten mm-hmm. muscles in your body. And so if you have a point of pain in your shoulder and you feel aversion to it, the muscles around that point of pain can contract, and it increases your overall pain load. So emotional reactions, the aversive reactions, can do that. And then the third component, which is also mental, is what I was talking about earlier, the storytelling that we start to tell. No one wants to hang out with me anymore. I'm going to be miserable the rest of my life. Things were perfect before I got sick. Yeah, right. So this is just my attempt to show people that the actual physical discomfort has, that two of the three components are actually mental, and that you learn to work with the mind to change those reactions from aversion to compassion and to equanimity, which is a way of accepting. This is the way. It's not an indifference. It's a compassionate accepting of the way things are in your life.
So it's a loaded term to say getting real, but it's getting honest with yourself, but in a very loving and kind fashion.
Absolutely. I think getting real is fine, because a fine way to think about it, because one of the things that, I say in the book that I said this earlier here, that it's important to be honest with yourself about the realities of life. The fact that there's a lot we don't control, unexpected things happen. Life is a mixture of pleasant and unpleasant experiences. I've never gone through a day without an unpleasant experience. That's just getting real, as you called it. I like that. Getting real with life. Because it's only at that point that you can then move forward and say, okay, this is the way life is, rather than fight it and make things worse for myself mentally. I'm going to use this as my starting point. I don't control the fact that I'm sick. I'm not certain whether I'll get better. I may not. That's my starting point. Now I want to start from there and see what I can do within my limitations to lead a life of purpose and love and goodness.
Woo! Let's go from there. I'm going to jump back into an earlier section of the book, because when I think about alleviating mental suffering, I think of the suffering of, I often say that anxiety or worry is caused, truly actually insanity, is caused by two taskmasters. Wanting to do two things that you can't possibly do at the same time or place, and tearing yourself apart. And
Right.
You have a brilliant concept, which you had to make by design or necessity, the not-to-do list.
Yes. People liked my not-to-do list so much that I wrote, I'm kind of getting my book here because I can't remember all the things that are on it.
Yep.
But people liked the not-to-do list so much that I wound up writing a not-to-do list for caregivers, because there's a tendency for caregivers to hold themselves to unreasonable standards. And so I also talk about how caregivers shouldn't assume that shouldn't assume that they always have to be 100% up for the job.
The knight in shining armor all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay to have days when, to be honest, you just don't really want to be a caregiver. And on those days, of course, you're going to do what the have-tos for your loved one. Make sure that they're safe and fed, but you don't have to rejoice in the role. It's okay to have off days. So yeah, my not to do list was so well received that I wrote one for caregivers too. After writing one for those of us who need the care, and a lot of what's in the list are things that I've really talked about before. There's a tendency to put our pre-illness life on a pedestal. I did that because I was very happy in my teaching job. And so one of my not to do's is don't put your pre-illness life on a pedestal and start worshiping it. But if I get real and think about it, there were things about the job I didn't like. Students could be difficult. I hated reading blue books. Sometimes I was given a class assignment that was just a lot of work to prepare for, and I didn't always feel confident in my abilities.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do have a not to do list, and it boils down to, a lot of it boils down to not doing things that take you out of your present moment experience, because this is the moment you're alive right now. And so the question always is, what can I do in this moment to make my life better and make the life of those around me better, to alleviate suffering? I mean, what higher calling is there in life, really?
I think it makes it clearer and easier, too, when we start to put a different lens, and what better lens could we put on than to help others, to be able to say no, which we have a hard time to doing as a society. Yeah. We either want to please, or we feel obligated, or there's the G word, guilt.
Right. Right. You know, I was raised to please others. Even if it wasn't good for me to be doing that, even if it violated my own values and violated my own abilities. Right now, my abilities are so limited physically. And so I do talk about, there's a chapter in the book about learning to say no. And really, it's an act of self-compassion. And in a way, if you don't say no, it's not always compassion. You may think, well, yeah, but what about others? But to be forcing yourself to engage in activities when you really shouldn't be, others pick up on that. And I don't think they feel, I know with my family, they don't want me to force myself to do things that when I should be saying no. For one thing, often they have to deal with the consequences, which is my being in bed for several days. Yeah. So it is important. It's not selfish to say no. It's an act of self-compassion. And as I said, can be compassionate toward others too.
I call it putting on the oxygen mask on yourself first.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah.
From there, kind of an interesting one, as we're a show that's really geared towards helping people and helping people raise their vibration. I think people can get lost in this one, and you cut through the chase. What's the tyranny of positive thinking?
Well, it's simply that, first of all, I don't think anybody can think positively all the time. There was an interview in Time magazine some years ago where the Dalai Lama admitted that sometimes he gets angry. So obviously he's not thinking positively all the time. Well, the problem with holding yourself to that standard is that then when that doesn't happen, you you turn self-judgment on yourself.
So you're
Negative
having,
self-judgment.
it's sad because you can have a negative moment, as you're describing. You have a moment of, you're human.
Yeah.
You have a
Yeah.
moment, and then you turn on yourself for being human.
Exactly. So you double your suffering. You double the suffering. So if you find yourself not feeling positive, this is why mindfulness is so important. To me, the most important thing to be mindful of is what's going on in your mind. To be able to say, wow, I'm in a foul mood. Okay, moods come and go. Let me make sure that I don't inflict it on somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Let me make sure I don't make it worse by blaming myself because I'm not feeling positive right now. And let me just do something interesting and distracting until the mood goes off. So, because, impermanence is a universal law, no mood is here to stay. So, this idea that if you think positively, your life you'll always be happy. I haven't found anyone for whom that works. Just because what happens is, as human beings, we're subject to the full range of moods. And so when that mood starts to get on the unpositive side of the pendulum, if we've told ourselves, you must think positively, then we're just going to turn self-blame and, double our suffering.
Yeah, as you're going back and forth, trying to control that.
Right. Yeah. I like to think of moods and thoughts as just energy coming and going in the mind. And I work on not becoming attached to any of those things as permanent features of myself. They come, they go. And this can help you have a positive outlook on life, because speaking of positive, because it means that if you're having a day when you're just feeling blue, that's okay. Everyone gets the blues. And don't get down on yourself for it. Just take care of yourself, do something special, whatever, some silly TV show or a hot bath or something, and know that moods are impermanent, because they're just energy going through the mind that arise. Moods arise based on causes and conditions in your life. What happens to be what's come together at the moment. Maybe someone said something that made you feel bad, plus you're feeling a little lonely and separated from people. So there can be this convergence of conditions that make you feel blue or in a bad mood. And you don't need to worry about it becoming permanent, because those conditions are going to change. And tomorrow the sun, metaphorically, the sun is going to come out, or maybe for real the sun is going to come out, and things are going to change. So I hope that people will hold, this is not denial of blue moods and bad moods, but hold them lightly. Say, okay, that's how I feel right now. What can I do to make the day pass in as pleasant a way as possible, knowing that there's no reason to think that I'll feel this way in a couple hours or tomorrow.
You use a beautiful technique. It's not your own. You cite it in your book, but I wonder how you use it. It seems really powerful. Byron Katies, 4 questions and a turnaround.
Yes, this is something that was so helpful to me when I got sick, maybe 2 or 3 years into it. I can't remember how I came upon her book. I don't remember anyone giving it to me, but I got it. And basically, she has a technique, but you don't even have to use her technique. Mm-hmm. What she does is have you question the validity of your thoughts. And you see, I've already touched on this. When I say that I think of thoughts as simply something that arise in the mind based on the causes and conditions that are present at the moment. But we tend to talk ourselves into, or we tend to believe our thoughts, no matter whether they have any basis in fact or not. And so she has this 4-step technique that I would take too long to go through, I think, but in which you start with a thought that is stressful. My friends don't like me anymore. Okay, that's good enough, right? Mm-hmm. And then you ask yourself, well, are you positive that's true? Well, half the time you're going to say, I guess I'm not positive it's true. But even if you are positive that it's true, she has you go on and think about how you would feel without that thought. Whoa, talk about putting a burden down. And so what she does is she teaches you that there's no reason to believe your thoughts. They come, they go, and a lot of suffering a lot of Buddhist teachers like to say the suffering is in the stories. Well, the suffering is in believing the stories. You can't control what the mind's going to think. So, if you're worried about the results of a medical test, that worry's going to arise. But if you've practiced, if you have some experience with mindfulness, you're more likely to say, oh, worrying about the results of a test, well, I have no control over those results. There's no reason to think they'll be bad rather than good. Let me bring myself to the present moment and not believe the thought that it's going to be a negative result. So Byron Katie's technique is geared toward helping us learn not to believe our thoughts because they're the cause of such suffering. You can find her stuff online very easily. She's a remarkable woman.
Thank you so much for sharing on that. We've got just a few more questions, then we'll begin to wrap things up. But okay. I've got to ask. You are really. I can feel what you're going through, but you are shining really bright. How have you? Where did the energy? Where did the something come from to write these books? To say, I've got to really meter my energy. This isn't the situation that I would have chosen for myself. But I'm going to put out some beautiful work to do some good in the world. How?
How did I do that? I get asked that a lot. It was really hard. I lie on the bed, and on days when I feel well enough, I pull my laptop over because it sits on a desk next to me, and I may only write a few paragraphs, but that's what I've done for that day. And so I guess the answer is I wrote them slowly, but with determination to turn this unexpected and unwelcomed happening in my life into something that could help others. It's just this burning desire I have to try to help others. And that's why I wrote the books.
Thank you. Thank you. What words of wisdom do you want to share for people who are going through this as well?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't blame yourself. I said this before, but I'm going to say it again. We're in bodies, and we don't control everything that happens to our bodies. We don't control our genetics. Mm-hmm. We don't control getting injured. We don't control what we might be exposed to out in the world. Your wife was exposed to mold. I was exposed to a virus. That wasn't her fault. So the most important thing is to not blame yourself for the way things are. Now, that doesn't mean in the big picture that you can't learn from past experience. If you've done something that you realize now caused you a lot of suffering, mm-hmm. It doesn't mean there's a difference between saying, I'm not going to do that again, and saying, you stupid idiot, why did you do that? Such a difference. Yeah. There is never any reason to direct blame at yourself. And that's not the same as learning from the past. Learn and move on. So the number one thing I would say to people is be as kind to yourself as you would be to the people that you love in your life. And if that requires that you pretend that you be them, do it. So if you have a child, pretend that your child has come to you and said, Mom or Dad, I'm unhappy. What would you do? You would soothe that child. You would hug that child. You would say, it's going to be okay. Life is hard sometimes, but it's going to be okay. Say that to yourself. In my opinion, there is never a valid reason for not being kind to yourself. And that winds up radiating out to others. Because when you are kind to yourself, you know what happens? You naturally want to be kind to others. And what would our world be like if everyone acted that way?
Woohoo! You even have a practice in the book you talk about, well, I guess it's a practice of your life, of being kind to others when you do go out.
Yes, it is something it's a little vow I take when I walk out the front door. Just be friendly. Be friendly and kind to people you see. Everybody has their suffering and their difficulties. And I've learned to just look at people I don't know and just say to myself, may you be happy. May you have a good day. Yeah.
I love it. What do you say to people that are going through this, whose friends, families, doctors, people they don't even know, don't understand or don't kind of come through the way that you expect or hope?
Obviously, the first thing I do recommend, and I think it's the very first chapter in the book, try to educate them. Because there are people who, in your life, who are open if they just have the information. So don't assume that they're going to go out and on their own look up whatever illness you have or whatever, So be proactive. Xerox stuff, print stuff off the web. Send them an email. Send them a story in an email. So to educate them. That said, there may be people in your life who simply can't handle what's happening to you. it may raise their own, it may tap into their own fears about illness or death. And so, again, the most important thing is to not blame yourself when friends and family and doctors, with doctors, I recommend find another doctor. But let's talk about friends and family. Don't blame yourself. When they're not there for you, it's about them. And I don't mean that in a blaming way either. Mm-hmm. It's about their own life story, their own fears, their own lack of skill. They simply have never learned how to be around people who are ill. And so when I first got sick, I was resentful with friends and one family member in particular who simply wouldn't accept that I was chronically ill. And then I reached a point where I realized I'd done everything I could to try to get them to understand. And I let them slip out of my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm much better for it. And I hope they are too. I don't feel any resentment or anger toward them. So I think this is really an equanimity practice, to be able to say, some people are going to come through for me, some people are not. And that is true in every aspect of your life. Yeah. And that's probably, I'm sure it's true for me. There must be people I didn't come through for. So that's the way life is. It's a mixed bag. And so stick with the people who support you and be compassionate and forgiving towards those who don't. They have their own demons. They have their own difficulties in life. So that's my advice.
Thank you. So where can people go to find out more and to find your books?
Oh, well, my daughter was nice enough to make a website. Woohoo! It's not actually an active website. It just has information on it. There's a page about me and about each of my books and where you can buy them. And all you have to do is put Toni Bernhard, Bernha, Toni, I have to say, ToniBernhard.com, and my website will come up. And the books are available at all the bookstores and online stores, that kind of thing. I also write for Psychology Today. They have a wonderful online site with, they have a lot of people who write for them, and I post every couple weeks either on chronic illness or on compassion, mindfulness, these other things I've been talking about, and often on the two combined. And you can find, like I said, if you go to my website, you can find a link to I think it says blog. Yeah. And that's something where you could also find my writing. Yeah.
Beautiful. And what we'll do is we'll put a link on our site on inspirenationshow.com. So if they can't get the spelling right, we'll get them over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A couple last questions we have, which is one's a lot of fun. Well, they're both fun. But what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
The woohoo factor.
Yes.
You know, I have to say, and I'm not one of those people who's very, I try to avoid the really wild ups because for me, they tend to be countered by the really wild downs. So I'm not a big woohoo person. I hope that's okay.
It's perfectly all right.
But I'll tell you what, for me, those woohoo moments are those moments of accepting my life as it is and having that be okay with me at the deepest level. Nothing brings me more woohoo than being able to say, this is my life, and it's okay. It's okay. If I never get well, it's okay. And boy, it took me a long time to be able to say that. And maybe that's why it's such a woohoo moment for me.
Woohoo!
Ooh, yeah.
Any last words of wisdom or guidance you want to share with people?
Just to be patient with yourselves. I've talked a lot, and I hope I haven't given the impression that all of this is easy for me, because it's not. I work on it every day, and sometimes I don't succeed. And so patience, which is to me another type of, it's an aspect of self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Be patient with yourself. If you mess up, say, okay, I messed up. I'll try again. There's a Zen master who likes to say, keep a try mind. And I love that expression. Keep a try mind and a forgiving mind. So that's what I would leave people with, is just how important it is to not have overblown expectations about your ability to be enlightened or awake or woohoo, whatever. Don't have just take it a step at a time and treasure the woohoo moments when they come, and be patient while you wait for the next one.
Woohoo! Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Toni. This has been a true honor.
How nice. I really enjoyed myself.
I'm so glad you've been on the show. I'm so thankful for your work. May it continue to go well, and I think there's no harm in sending you all the healing wishes in the world.
Well,
hopefully we can all do that listening to you.
No harm at all. And I send them back to you and to your wife. And you mentioned some other people in your life who are suffering with illness. I send healing to all of them.
Thank you so much. Yeah. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, learn how to live well, but be patient and keep a try mind, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also leave your comments, have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much, and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!